That's right. From the skin out.
From the skin out. Wow.
I know. I'm a dressmaker. That's how I got into this, is because I like challenges. Good morning. Thanks everyone for being here on this beautiful day. And good morning. You're here because you're curious about history and about what they were wearing underneath. So we'll take a look. And there's not very many of us, so if you have a question, a short question, feel free to interrupt me. It's not, it won't slow us down too much. If you have a long question, save it for the end. So let's just take a look. And again, as Stephen told you, I'm Kay Demlow. I've had the business for nearly 30 years. And over the years, I've learned a lot. And so this is a result of many years of research. So along with learning how to make the clothes, I've learned why they were wearing them, and I'll share that with you today. This is one of the pictures I saw very early in my research. It was in a book that I bought back in the 1970s called 20,000 Years of Fashion. Since then, I've been able to find it online. It's from a fashion house in 1910. But looking at this picture, these ladies are exquisite. Who are these people? They almost look like fairies or angels or, you know, ephemeral beings. And so that's what got me interested in understanding how in the world normal, real human beings manage to look like this. I wanted to show you this lovely lady, another exquisite creature. And she is a real person, and you've seen her picture many times because she was the model for Charles Dana Gibson and for all those Gibson girls. Sometimes when I show up dressed in something from the Edwardian era, somebody will say, "You look like a Gibson girl," even though I don't look anything like her. It's the style. But look at that waist and that curve, and she's just, and then the sweep of her skirt. How does she do it? Here's what these women would look like after Charles Dana Gibson turned them into cartoons. The caption says, "Was that you I kissed in the conservatory last night?" And she answers, "About what time was it?" But look at her figure. Look at this body on this person. How can she be a real person? Well, let's take a look. Here's another absolutely exquisite person. And she's a debutante. So when I started looking at all these wonderful pictures, I was thinking, did real people really look like this? Did everyone look like this? Did my grandmother look like this? So, you know, a debutante is someone with some wealth and at the very prime of her youth, ready to be married, ready to be introduced to the world. So she's young, she's beautiful, and she can afford these clothes. But again, look at that tiny, tiny waist. Look at the shape of this girl. These are more average people. This is a group of schoolgirls from New Zealand, and yet they all still have full hair, beautiful posture, and the high lacy collars. So there's something going on here. Even average schoolgirls can get the look. They are. It's a beautiful look. This is, I'll tell you this over and over again this morning, but I really love this era. This is probably my very favorite. Well, let's take a look back, because before we can really get some context for who these creatures were and why they were dressing this way, let's look at what they were wearing 10 years earlier. Maybe their big sisters. We're in the 1890s now. And here is a portrait or a painting of a beautiful woman. And look at this figure. You've seen this in vaudeville shows. I'm sure the man is talking about having seen a beautiful lady, and he does this. That's the hourglass. And average women could achieve it. Well, maybe not average, but certainly these fashionable ones. So here's a good portrayal of how it goes in at the waist and then out at the hips. And then in the 1890s, they were making it look bigger at the top by those big sleeves. Here's another 1890s. Again, when I first saw this picture, I was thinking, how can that be a real person? But she's probably someone very healthy and very slender, probably young, possibly even a professional model. And then she's wearing really good underwear. So we'll take a look. at how they did this. Another thing you'll notice about the 1890s is the shape of that skirt. It is stiff. Those skirts were lined. They have an edge at the bottom about this big of stiffening, interfacing, that makes them stand out even further. And if you can, I don't know if you can see it on this skirt, but on many of them there's even a little edge below that, so that the bottom edge doesn't, the fashion fabric doesn't get dirty. But it all stiffens it and gives it, that skirt would probably stand up by itself. It's very structured. But underneath it, she's wearing petticoats too. So we'll take a look. Here's what she's wearing underneath, or maybe not the same lady, but you'll look and see that she is really tightening quite a bit above the hips. So a corset can only do so much. It can't take in the bone structure. But they allowed the hips to just be full and soft, and then the corset gives it that structure. And then in the front, you see it's lifting and supporting. Underneath it, she's wearing a chemise. And this is a late 1890s chemise. I'm going to pause for a moment and show you an earlier chemise. This one is probably from the 1860s or 1870s. This would have been worn under the corset. And all of this beautiful work up here, extra layers of fabric and ruching, gave her a smooth, soft shape. It's all illusion. So it could even be someone who's fairly thin, but this would give her the look of a bosom. And you'll also notice this earlier one is made of a fairly substantial fabric. This is heavier than our bed sheets today. It's a good, solid chemise. During the 1860s, 1870s, your trousseau, which is probably what this was from, was expected to last you your entire married life. Your underwear that you made for your wedding was maybe the last splurge you had before you started having children and family, and they didn't expect they'd go out of style, and they made them durable.
Did they make them with an expectation of gaining weight?
Well, this is pretty roomy. Yeah. No, I suppose if you gained weight, you'd have a legitimate reason to get new underthings. But they did, if you read some of the lists of wedding gifts or trousseaus, there were dozens of chemises and drawers. Now, they wouldn't all be this fancy. This really is like the ultimate, you know, and it's in beautiful shape. The other thing is, this is this garment that goes next to your skin, under the corset, under the dress, and this is in a day before deodorant had been invented. So this is what absorbs your body oils, your perspiration, and it can be washed. It's pure white cotton. Scrub it with some strong soap, and you will have a nice, fresh, clean garment, and you don't have to wash the dress so often, because that was a challenge. So just to give, this is what came before. Durable, heavy-duty, strong fabric. Sometimes I've heard it called long cloth. It's a weave that we can hardly get today, but it's from long, staple fibers that will, I mean, it's not 200 years old, but it's close to it. And it's still in such good shape. So that's what came before. Now this young lady is wearing something a little frillier than that. She's starting to change out. And we're starting to see that styles are going to be changing a lot faster than they did in the 1860s and 70s. There she is. I'll give you some terminology. Down the front, you see some little things that look like buttons. That's the metal clasps of her busk. There's strips of metal inside the corset that hook over each other. So it's easy to put on and off, and then you tighten it. So they were almost all made this way by the 1890s. So that's that terminology. The front, if you'll notice, seems to curve slightly over her belly. That's a spoon busk. It's shaped like the bowl of a spoon that curves over the tummy. So that's truly an hourglass. If you think about the shape of an egg timer or an hourglass, it's rounded all around. And that was the ideal. And here's what it looks like under clothes. This is about 1900. And look at the tiny waist. From the front, we see them go in and then out. Now, if we got a side view, it might not look quite so skinny, but these are very slender women. And you can see they're lifting their skirts to protect them from the city sidewalk. And you can see petticoats under both of those. One is white and one is dark, but definitely petticoats. But that's what it looks like when you get all dressed up. Here's a picture of a silk petticoat. Not everybody had silk petticoats, of course, but you'd have the white cotton petticoat. Let me show you a cotton petticoat from the early times. This poor thing has been worn and damaged. It has the knitted lace at the bottom. Like Laura in The Long Winter was knitting lace for her sister's petticoat. It might have looked something like this. Tucks, which make it stiffer around the bottom. And then if you'll notice, this part that's the front is fairly smooth. The back has all these gathers. We're trying to pull the fullness to the back. So there's a lot of architecture going on in even a simple petticoat. It's basically rectangles, but the gathers are controlled back here. And you can also see this poor thing has been mended and the button has torn out. This woman wore her petticoat a long time. This one maybe was intended as an under petticoat or just an everyday. Can you imagine ironing all those ruffles? But again, this is very sturdy fabric, and she would have worn it. Obviously, she wore it many, many times, probably with everything in her closet. This is what they called a skirt petticoat, or the silk petticoat. It goes over your cotton petticoats, and that is in between your skirt and your cotton clothes. It's made of silk. Not everybody could afford it, and in fact, it was a real status symbol to walk into the room and everybody could hear it rustle. Here's an example. Now, this is not an antique. This is one that I made. Just in my moving it, you can hear it rustle. O. Henry had a great short story about the value of a newspaper. And I don't know if anyone has read it. The family buys the newspaper and brings it home, and the father wraps his lunch in it, and the mother uses it for cutting out a dress pattern, and the daughter takes some pieces of newspaper and puts them under her skirt so that when she walks outside, the neighbor girl will hear it rustle and makes her jealous. And then at the end, O. Henry, who was writing this for publication in a daily newspaper, said, and they say newspapers aren't worth anything. So that's the value of the rustle.
And were those generally weighted silk?
Some were, and this is obviously modern silk that's not. It will not wear out. But there was some, most silk manufacturers in the late 19th century did use metallic salts in the final wash. It made the fabric heavier and it made it shinier. And so, of course, it looked even more valuable and they could charge more for it. But then after a year or 2 or 5, the metallic salts start to break apart the fibers. And then you get the shattering. So some of these might have been. There aren't that many. I mean, I have a small collection, but I haven't seen a lot of them available. And I do have a lot of silks that are shattering. It's very sad. Yeah. So they probably would have been, yeah. They also made over petticoats or skirt petticoats out of polished cotton. And we're trying to find substitute fabrics, blends, cotton silk blends or something. But nothing rustles like that silk. So.
Over what time period did they weight silks?
I am not sure when it started, but I have seen dresses from the 1840s that are still rich and beautiful. They wanted them crisp, and that's where the metallic salts came in, is crisp and rustling, and I'm sure they were beautiful when they were new. So mid-19th century, I'm thinking, it's when marketing really kicked into gear. So that's as far as, but I was going to explain another thing about the silk petticoat. A lot of those skirts in the 1890s were lined, maybe with a polished cotton or something like that. And so you wouldn't necessarily wear this. But you start to get smart and say, I could have one silk petticoat and then I don't have to line all my skirts. So women can make more clothes for themselves, have a bigger wardrobe, but only one silk petticoat to go under everything. And it was called a drop petticoat or a or a top petticoat or a skirt petticoat. There were lots of names for them, but that's what that is. And it's just, I have worn this to my Edwardian society parties. People know when I walk in the room, oh, are you wearing a silk petticoat? So there is, even in modern times, something very gratifying about it. So that's another way of getting the skirt to be flared and getting that luscious swirl now. And then we get into a little bit of real life. This is around 1880, this picture was painted. But you can see she is wearing a corset underneath some sort of white cotton top. And that top would be called a corset cover. But on a hot day, she's not going to wear her full dress to do the ironing. This is a picture of the maid, doing the ironing. She's wearing either a petticoat or a skirt. It shows us the shape, and she doesn't have that tiny, tiny waist and those big hips. It's a more typical look. So that's our 1890s and slightly earlier. I imagine that little blouse that she's wearing, the corset cover, was the same kind of sturdy fabric that these other undergarments were. But now we're going to move slightly ahead. Fashion started to change. Not sure the reason. That's another area of research. But the 1890s had been stiff, structured, rigid. And about 1897, maybe women got tired of being so strong-looking all the time because they started to wear softer fabrics, softer clothes, and things that you can almost see through in the light. But if you look, under this delicate summer dress, she still has that hourglass figure. So this is a transition time. The fabrics are softer, but the figure is still an hourglass. And here's what one of those, this was from a trousseau also. They really, if you could afford it, you'd put a lot of money into your trousseau because you were expected to make it last for a long time. But it's just a beautiful garment and almost new condition. One other little detail, this hook here, not all corsets had it, but this was in a time when a lot of skirt or dresses came down below the waist. You pull those ties from around the back and tie them under that hook. So you've got a smooth section here. It starts to give you this illusion of being, poured out of wax. It's just very sculptural. So that's what that's for. If you ever come across it in an antique, that's what the hook was for. And here again we have a model showing us the ideal figure. This is from a French series. I'm sure they were slightly naughty postcards, but they were featuring how a French woman starts her day. And here she's brushing her teeth, but look at that tiny waist. You can train your waist to do that, especially if you're young. She's obviously, somewhere around 20 to 25. But again, we get the hips. That corset is very structured and very stiff to come all the way up and support her. And then you'll see a ruffle around the top of her chemise that spills over the top of the corset. The French people always cared a lot about every bit of your appearance, and so that would soften the top. Same as we saw on that real early one that had a lot of ruching and embroidery work up here. Now they're doing it with ruffles to make you look full across here. But look at that tiny waist. And here's another corset of the era. This one's straight across the front, not like the French girls that came down. Maybe it's more for your average American type. So there's just an ad. You'll look again at that chemise. There's a lot of softness up there. Once in a while in modern books or the covers of romance novels or something, you'll see a woman wearing a corset with nothing under it. And that's just a modern take on it. They never did it then because corsets are hard to wash, take a long time to dry, it wears them out. So you don't want to wash your corset until you have to. And you just wear clean underwear under it all the time. And here is your average person. And I'm sad to say that there are times that I put my corset on and it looks kind of like that down here too. But she still is achieving that line at the waist. You can cinch it in at the waist, but it has to go somewhere. And so the corset will push it down. And if you took that to extremes, then you start to get the warnings from doctors about displacement of your internal organs. Could happen. I don't think she has cinched that tightly. But it's just real interesting to see what it looked like on a real person, and that she was willing. I think she's modeling the corset, which gives her that form without anyone realizing how she looked below. She's got the chemise under the corset, and that's probably just the rest of the chemise down below. So now we've still got the hourglass corsets. We're going to move ahead because manufacturers are going to design something new for ladies to wear. We start to see this upright posture. Instead of the hourglass, she's got the sweep in the back and she's got the fullness in the front. You can see the shape of her bosom doesn't look like a modern woman wearing a bra. It's very smoothed out. There's a little lift back here, probably added by some padding right there. Or maybe her body looks like that. But really, most of us have a hollow place there. But they could fill that out with a little padding. And then the extra gathers on the petticoat and the shape of the skirt. And one thing I like about this picture is it shows us, if you can visualize, it's Art Nouveau inspired. You get those sinuous curves, just like some of those early pictures of the tendrils and the water lilies and the vines. They were capturing it in women's clothes. And so that's just the beginning of the S curve. You might have heard of that shape in fashion. It's just starting here. She's still very smooth over the front, but she is capturing a curve there, and then the curve over the back and sweeping down to the floor. Very, very elegant. And then here's a great ad. You may have seen this if you've done any research about corsets. The same lady, same outfit in this ad. The old corset, she's got the hourglass with the tummy. The new corset, they want to have the front from the waist down to the floor be very flat. It makes you look thinner. And then you can put all the fullness in the back, and she's probably wearing padding back there. And then you can also see it pushes her bosom out. So we're starting to get this look. Right around 1903, it was so emphasized that they had blouses that were this long. You could pull them out and fluff them and put maybe ruffles on your corset cover so that it was the dove breast is what they called it. It would stick out this far and hang down even over your belt. So this isn't that extreme. This is just the beginning of it. But yeah, we've shifted the shape, and it could be the same woman. Just you have to go spend some money and buy the new corset. And here's a picture of the corset itself, or one of the new corsets. So this is right around 1902, 1903. So very big over the hips. You see that they just got very clever. And this one is very low. Now it's an artist's rendering. A real woman probably wouldn't look quite that full here. But again, she's got the chemise, and it's gathered and tucked and fluffy. And then the lace. But the artist has made her waist look impossibly small just to sell the corset. And you'll also notice some garters hanging down. This is somewhat new. The earlier corsets didn't necessarily have those. They would wear stockings above the knee and tie or a roll elastic garter onto them to hold up your stockings. But now your corset has garters, and it will hold the tummy even flatter. And if you didn't want to go buy the new corset right away, you could buy this product, the Foster Hose Supporter. And actually there was more than just one. So even then, people couldn't always rush out and buy the latest style, but they still could look. And again, we have a before and after of the lady with and without this marvelous new invention. So you see 4 garters hanging down. You'd have one that would hold your stocking in front, one on the side. You don't need the garter that goes around your knees or around your legs. Now you've got these. And I have worn garters from my corset that do this, and they're very awkward. So I generally don't. But I'm thinking maybe I should make one of these and see how it works. Anyway, it's an early garter belt, but because of the way it fastens, it would hold you like this and actually pull you forward and flatten the tummy even more. So you could look fashionable in last year's corset. And here's another one, a similar idea. So it was not just one company who was inventing this workaround. And that one has, again, 4 garters. And then here we have this saucy wench showing us her underthings. It was probably intended as a naughty postcard, and she may have been a model, she might have been a prostitute, but she's very willing to pose for us and let us see her fancy stockings. They were probably brightly colored. There's that blousey look of the corset cover over the corset. We can see a little of her corset, and you can see how the string is tied down there underneath that hook, so we get the curve. And so even just in this little bit, you can see the Art Nouveau lines of dipping in the front. We're still going for that. But here's something very interesting, and that is you can see the edge of her chemise inside her drawers. A lot of people who start to do this reenacting or try to emulate an Edwardian look don't really know how all the layers go together, because unless you can see a picture of a woman in her underwear, how would you know? But the chemise goes under. It's the first thing you put on. The corset goes over that. The drawers go over all of that. And we haven't talked much about drawers, but you might be wondering, how did they work? By the Edwardian times, actually she has her drawers under her corset, doesn't she? Maybe it's just to show off the tiny waist. I've had other pictures that show them over, but it's definitely over the chemise. In the middle 19th century, they were open almost always. So the middle seam of the corset would just be completely open. It's like 2 different legs fastened at the waist. And that way, under all those big hoop skirts or fancy bustle skirts, if nature calls, you're ready, and you don't have to unbutton or pull anything down. But later in the 19th century, they started coming up with new ways of doing this. Here, this might have been a child's drawers. The waist is so tiny. These are closed down the center seam, fancy at the bottom, and there's a flap in the back. And you might remember that from old comics or cartoons, you know. You'd put these on in the morning, button them at the back, and then here's a flap. Long underwear was the same way. There'd be some sort of flap in the back. And this one still has the original buttons. They're made of ceramic. So they lasted all these years. And again, it's a fairly durable fabric, so it's probably 19th century. This one also has a tiny waist. Extra room at the back. There's a yoke put in here. So there's lots of room for sitting. And it's the same idea. It's not open. It could have been a child's. And it's got the same kind of ruching and lace that trousseau did, although it's not from the same region. And this has one tiny little button at the waist. So the whole thing goes on like a pair of pants. And it just buttons in one place. So those you'd have to pull down. But again, for children, they're not wearing all the structured skirts. They need to play, and they'd have closed ones. But there were open ones, and I've seen them. And in fact, I've tried wearing them at Civil War events. You had a question.
With the split underwear, how did they deal with their monthly?
Oh, good question, good question. You can look up more. There's an online group called the Museum of Menstruation. Yeah, you can look up all of this. But they had to just construct things with rags and old fabric, soft fabrics, absorbent, and about 1910, you start to see ads for products that you could buy. Maybe the 1890 Sears catalog had a couple things you could buy, straps and hooks and things like that. But everyone just had to make do. They used old cotton fabrics. Yeah, I know. Ugh, yeah. And that would be underneath the drawers, of course. So let's say goodbye to our saucy lady here. This is fun. These ladies all have this hourglass figure. They're Ziegfeld Follies dancers or performers. And look how they all have their hands behind their backs. So this was a little model trick of the day. These stage performers, they could stand like this, but then you're sagging and drooping. They want to get that full bosom, the wide shoulders. That was the ideal. And so they're standing like this and even leaning into the camera a little bit. If you look at them, some of them are leaning forward. So they have a flat front, a wide shoulder, wide bosom, and aren't they gorgeous? But again, they're not average people. These are showgirls. Oh, let's go back to the showgirls for a minute. Look at all those off the shoulder. Here I've been talking about how you always wear something under your corset. But look at them, they're all bare-shouldered. Where's their chemises? And this is one way you could do it. This was a product you could buy. It's a chemise, but you can untie the straps and pull it down and tie that under your corset ties. So you have your corset, you're wearing something under it, and you have those gorgeous bare shoulders for evening wear. They were very resourceful. It's not like everybody wore the same thing all the time. There was a lot of variation. So now I need one of those too. But nothing lasts forever. Now we've got the flat front. We've still got the big hips. Let's get some more fluff. Let's get some more fullness. Let's add some lace. This is the very high status look. These are professional models for a fashion house. But look at all that. This is when I start to get very excited about the Edwardian era, because they don't look like they could be real. But if you look at some of the dresses even that average people wore, after the talk, go look at those beautiful white dresses on display, because even your average lady would have her own version of these white dresses. It's just if you're rich, you can do this. And look at that tiny waist. I have to wonder if maybe that was retouched a little bit, the lady who's sitting. There were artists in every photo studio who could retouch. They could, maybe remove a wayward hair or touch up some skin, and they certainly could narrow your waist too. But they're just so lovely. Again, this is the ideal, the epitome of fashion. This was the glamour of the day. And then here's an artist version of it. They weren't all full of lace. Your day wear that you'd wear on the street might be more tailored. But again, they're showing that tilt. It looks like it would be uncomfortable to stand that way, but if you remember, there's padding back here, and this fullness here, it creates an illusion. And again, the artist will draw it at the most perfect moment. And then we look at real people, not showgirls. These were some society sisters. And we see some of the illusions they're using, but we also see they don't have quite the extreme curve of the waist. The corset's not working as hard, but they're all very slender and very healthy looking. We've got ruffles and lace across the bosom. So again, we're going for that look. And very bare shoulders. These are evening dresses. They might be doing that same thing where the chemise tucks into the corset. So it's just fun to look at them. They're just pretty ladies. But the underwear is what's really helping. Here's some more pretty ladies. This is at the races. So they're either models or they're wealthy. And the races in England was where you'd wear, and France, was where you'd wear your most fashionable new clothes. Even more than Easter Sunday is you'd get something new to wear to the races. So this would have been the very latest. And the lady on the right, you can see the shape of her waist is actually accentuating that curve again. So the corset does it, and then your clothes do it on top of that. And it's a very artistic look.
So when they were dressing and they would have their corset, then a lot of times I've seen, what are they called? The
Corset
top-
cover?
No, the tops that go with the skirt, and they're
Mhm.
all boned and everything
Yes.
too, so that
So
would
they don't
even-
wrinkle up.
Okay.
They stay right where you put them. I will show you a corset cover, though. You reminded me that I brought one. This is a replica. This is one I made. So it's very light, and then you draw it up with the ribbons, so you've got some softness there. And it's quite possible that they're doing that. There was a gradual evolution from the very stiff clothes of the 1890s to these softer, less structured, but they still were structured here because you don't want it creasing. You know, if you wear a soft belt and make it too tight, it starts to cave in around there. You can stay perfect looking all day if you've got boning in your dress. And then here's the artist version. But this is from a pattern company, so this is for your average woman to make at home. And there's that dip belt. It was called a dip belt. But none of that works unless you have the right corset. And then here's some really average people. Nice ladies, and you can see that they're all wearing corsets. And the lady in the back has a belt that slightly dips. So even average ladies in Indiana are following the fashion within the bounds of what's comfortable. They're very cute. So during this time period, again, these are your ideals. Look at all the ruffles on that petticoat. That's probably her skirt petticoat, the silk one that would hold out the skirt and be very fancy. And you can see we've even accentuated the drop in the bust. Her bust isn't up here like that first lady we looked at in the S curve. It's now dropped. The corset is lower. And here on this lady, it's somewhere in between. She's very full-bosomed, but the corset is doing its job, holding her up. And you can see she's wearing the garters, so she has a very fashionable corset. And it's high in the back. That's for ease in sitting, and you don't really need to hold anything in back there. So again, we're looking at fashion models. And here's some actual garments from private collections. This one is so extreme. The gold corset up there, lots of room in the hips. So that would be for someone who had a lot of, who was blessed with a lot to begin with, or who wore padding underneath the corset. And there are modern reenactors doing that today. They're creating padding and then making themselves corsets shaped like that. All right, if you're not endowed in the upper regions, you could get a garment like this. That's boning inside this corset cover. Then you'd have still a soft top over in case nature didn't give you anything there. So you could wear that.
But you stuff stuff in there?
You could put, I've seen dress improvers that are little ruffled circles that tuck inside your corset. But if that isn't enough, you could wear this. Who's going to know? You know?
Oh, your husband will know.
Eventually someone will find out. But for the young woman who hasn't maybe filled out yet, this was another way she could get the fashionable figure. And here's someone who didn't need that. She's very slender, but she doesn't seem to be too worried about it. And again, she's either a model or, you know, someone posing for a naughty postcard or something like that. But it's very nice to see the shape of her chemise, and look how low her corset is in the back. When you're young and slender, you don't need a lot of corsetry. It's just to give you the shape and to keep it right there. And you'll also notice her stockings are sheer silk stockings. That's like an evening look. And you can just barely see the top of one of her stockings under her ruffles. So she's got everything on except the petticoat and the outer clothes. I just had to share this one. I was mentioning retouching before. This is not her real shape. If you'll look under her arms, where she's standing, someone has come in with very dark paint and touched it up. That's just beyond possible. And in fact, if you look at the lace at the top of the corset, it probably came down much straighter from there. But just to remember, not everything you see on these old pictures means they really look like that. I did want to point out something interesting, though. You can see how her drawers fit. And again, she's wearing her drawers under the corset. And you can see that she's wearing long underwear. On a cold, wintry day, you could wear your long underwear, long johns. They weren't just for men. And you can also see that she put a chemise on over her underwear. Now, I don't know if every woman did that, but it's just, that long underwear was designed to go next to the skin. So was she doing it with tight lacing? This is from a stereoscope picture. It was a joke picture because really you can tighten them yourself. You just crisscross those laces and do this. But it's, you know, it's a humor card. And it's fun to look at all these girls in their cute little unders. It may be like the bride preparing for the wedding. It might be part of a series because you can see the lacy dress on the left there. So I enjoy that one. Is that how they did it? This lady is just, again, a model. She's exquisite. She has super tight laced. And if you look at, and very frilly drawers, layers of frills. She's got the garters in the front, holding down the front. And if you look in the mirror picture, you can see the back. They've actually laced it tighter than it normally would be worn because it comes together and then out. Those two edges, that's the gap. Normally that's supposed to be parallel. So for this picture, and to make her look exquisitely small, they pulled it in. But that's, I know from experience, that's uncomfortable to wear for very long because it starts to poke you in odd places. So for the purposes of this fashion photo, she laced it tighter even than the corset was designed to be. But isn't she pretty? And again, there's lace on the corset, so we get the softness here. And she has a pretty chemise, a bow here. Let's fill in a gap there so we get the monobosom look, not, you know, we don't want to see too much. And, and her black stockings are opaque. So this is more of her daytime look. Fashion's going to change again. It always does. So here we still have a flat front, and she's just beautiful, and her skirt's still full. But you can see we're starting to notice her hips, and there's not that extreme change from the hips to the waist. So we're getting a little bit more natural proportion. And she's very young. Look at her face. This picture you may have seen if you've done any fashion research. At the races, a fashion house had designed or developed a new kind of corset that was supposed to be elastic. And then they dressed the models in these form-fitting dresses. And it was shocking. The other people at the race were just staring at these models. You can see they're looking a little nervous and a little bold as they stride across the grounds. But look at the shape. It almost looks as if they had no corset, just perfect bodies. But there was an elastic corset under there that didn't have a lot of ridges. And it was the beginning of a new look, even though women were so shocked when they first saw it, and men. They said it looked like they were naked. Let's see if I can get back. I think this is the corset. Yeah. I wish I had more detail on this one, but this is what that corset would look like. It was some sort of elastic material. Knitted, rubberized, who knows. But it's no seams. And it comes down really long, so all of a sudden the emphasis is down here on the hips. Here's your average women. This is a bridal party. And I just love the expressions on their faces. They're all trying to have that look. This is from about 1907, which is right around the time this new svelte look was coming out. But they're all wearing their sweet bonnets, you know, their big bonnets, and they all have achieved that smooth hip. Now, some of the girls could probably have benefited from a little extra padding up here, but they're very young. This is, you know, they probably spent all their money on the wedding dress and didn't plan to buy a new corset. But it's just fun to see average people doing the best they can to achieve the fashion look. One more time. Fashion continues on. Let's see how svelte we can look. What kind of underwear would you wear to get that body? She's just magnificent. And if you recognize the shape, this is getting close to the Titanic era. If you think about what Rose was wearing. And if you remember from the movie, she had a very long corset. So cover those hips. Don't let anything show. And she is a model. We're getting slimmer and slimmer. Here's a fashion house. The customers are looking at the mannequin. Look how slim it comes and just the little swoop at the bottom. It's not a triangular shape anymore. It's slim. We don't need so many petticoats. And here is an ideal. It's a triangle, but it's slimmer. So let's see what they're wearing underneath. Oh, one more look at the ideal. These must have been very skinny models. Just up and down. And notice we're not even looking at their waist anymore. This was what they would call a directoire fashion, named after the time in France, right after the Revolution, when there was a director. A director, there's a French word for it. Anyway, before Napoleon conveniently came in. And so it's the high waist, it's early, what we would call empire fashions. They were trying to do a retro fashion based on that. And so instead of emphasizing that tiny waist and the dip, all of a sudden we're up to here, and we need different underwear. And here's the artist's conception of what that corset would look like. Again, impossibly tiny hips based in, you know, compared to what she looks like on top. And they're still wearing their chemise underneath. I met a woman one time who we were talking about chemises under corsets, I think after I gave a talk like this, and she said her grandmother always wore an undershirt under her bra, and she never understood why. Her grandmother was raised in this era, when you don't let your structural garment touch your skin. So for some people, this carried on forever and ever. So we want a little less bulk in there. We don't need all those waistbands and buttons. And so this is only one example of a combination undergarment that came along. Lots of, and so that could go under your corset. You've got the drawers and the chemise all in one.
The dress that was open at the...
That would have to have been open. If you look at the back here, it may have had buttons and the flap, or it could have been open. There were so many different clever ways that they tried to work with that. And then here we have our average women again. This was a trip to New York in 1911, girls from Oregon. So we've got the up and down look. There's a younger girl still wearing her flared skirt, and the lady in the back on the left is wearing that very slim look. So that's how your average woman would interpret the look. This lady is confusing, but probably homemade, yeah. She does have a skirt on. She's got some sort of white shoes and then a long dark skirt. So it's a layered skirt look. I had to study her for a while to figure out what her look was. So yeah, it kind of looks to me like when people do old-timey costumes, but I don't think she was intending that. I think she had a textured fabric, a stripe, that just photographed this way. It may have been all color coordinated, like a dark blue skirt and a blue and green stripe, but just somehow it came out like that. But yeah, they're all as fashionable as they can be for their trip to the big city. Yeah. Oh, and then here we go to Colorado for real people. And this lady is trying to go for the directoire look. She's got the very high-waisted skirt, but she probably could have used a better corset or even a brassiere. And the shiny fabric just makes it more obvious. So I don't mean to make fun of her, but and you can tell they're probably pretty well to do. There's their house behind him, and he's very well dressed, and she's wearing probably silk. It's just corsetry lady. So yeah, we'll go on. Those long straight skirts, they were also called hobble skirts. You can't take a big step in them. I believe this is a joke photograph. The fellows are all looking at the lady getting on, and she's got her sheer stockings on. She's very fun to look at. But with a long straight skirt, you cannot take a big stride. You have to pull your skirt all the way up to the knees. And that's what she's done to get on this train. But you can also see she's got a beautiful corset on. There, again, is that high-waisted look and the beautiful pear-shaped hips. And there she goes, and all the men are taking a look. So that didn't last long. Hobble skirts came and went within a couple years. Then we're in the teens. King Edward has passed. This is what's coming after. It's no longer the Edwardian age, but it doesn't really have a name in fashion history, so most of us still think of it as late Edwardian or post-Edwardian. We're certainly not up to the Jazz Age yet, but you can see all the experimentation going on in women's fashion. Straight up and down, we've lost our waist. We don't care about that so much, but we're still wearing corsets. Except something else was happening. War broke out in Europe in 1914. America entered the war in 1917. All of a sudden, all of those frilly things just seemed so pointless. So let's get businesslike. And along with changing the basic shape, we get fuller skirts for a couple years into the war. And so we need more petticoats again. So here's our sensible underwear. Reading the description of these, they're all cotton, and they're all a lightweight, thin kind of cotton. Nansuk or different batistes or something. Those are sheer. They're not like these durable cottons. These garments wouldn't have held up. And in fact, I've seen some antiques that are just deteriorating because you perspire on them and they wear out. But that's what their underwear might have looked like, except they're still pretty corsets. And we're still going for this ideal. This is 1915. And then there's the petticoats. These were mostly silk in this ad, and they would rustle like this one, but they're shorter. Fashion goes in these cycles, but they are a little different each time it comes around. And again, that's what you'd wear over your cotton petticoats and under your skirt. But your average people might not be wearing silk petticoats. They're probably wearing corsets. Nice posture, but they're relaxed, they're comfortable, they're not tight lacing, they're not suffering for fashion. They're having a very good time. And I had to share these ladies with you. This is 1917. They are styling in their own way. They're not following the current fashion. This is the DAR, a local or a DAR group. And all of them are wearing very elaborate fashions, but they're not following New York and Paris necessarily. But if you look closely at each of them, you can see they are all corseted. I love the one lady there near the left. She's clearly flat front, full bosom, and very proud of her group and the way she's dressed. She might be the president or one of the officers. But all of these ladies are wearing everything proper. Well, just briefly, time marches on yet again. After the war and a pandemic, people shifted fashion yet again. Slightly shorter skirts, we're used to seeing ankles by now, and slimmer. So again, you don't need that big petticoat. Here's what some of these start to look very edgy and start to remind us of the 1920s. I'm not going to go quite as far as the 1920s, but these are some 1919 fashions. Post-war and very artistic in a new and edgy kind of way. And then here's your average people. So we've got the skirt and blouse look. Her blouse is very pretty. There's still a memory of all the fluffy ruffles that have been worn. And under those sheer blouses, you would wear a corset cover of some sort. and your corset. You can tell by looking at her hips and tummy, she's probably corseted. And she looks very comfortable too. Just to give us a look at what they're wearing, we start to see adjustable corsets with hip tightening. And for the young slender, it's just like a tube. And then there's some long underwear too. It doesn't show us, but I am pretty sure there would be some sort of snap opening or something, just for convenience. Oh, while we're looking at these corsets, these are both from about this time or maybe a little later, but it shows you the materials they would have been made of. I can actually just let you hand those around. There's boning in them. Here, take a look. And the straps make them more adjustable. Isn't that something? So they're both very similar. They have elastic in them, elastic panels. Yeah, the fabric is thin and, pretty. So that's just, and there's garters on both of these, I believe. By now they're used to having garters on their garments.
Looks like a girdle to me.
Yeah, exactly. These corsets are getting lower and lower. They're not supporting the bust anymore. They're becoming what we would call a girdle. It's like an evolution in fashion. And you can see even just in this one little ad, there's several styles available. So it's not like everybody went out and bought the same thing. Depending on your age and what you needed it for, and whether you were skinny or stout or in between, there were a lot of options. And there's a picture of an actual corset. Look how pretty that one is. And look how long it is. And then there's a picture of an early brassiere. When the corset is down here, we need something up here. And the chemise can only do so much. It's only one layer. I do have some later bras. This is probably from the 30s. But you can see it's not structured like a modern one. It's just a little wisp of a thing. Here's an early one, probably not worn very much, but it's that shattered silk. Little straps, very delicate. This would be after 1919 probably. And then a little hook here to hook it to your girdle or your corset. All right. I do have, while we're talking corsets, an alternative corset. This is a Ferris Good Sense waist. Even back in the 1890s, there were people who were reformers and health nuts who were saying, why are you doing this to yourself? Why are you wearing them so tight? But they still needed something to support the bust and control the figure under whatever clothes you're going to wear. So your Good Sense waist, this is probably a teenage girl's. Doesn't have the rigid boning. It buttons and then adjusts. But there's not that flare over the hips. It's a slight flare. It just fits the natural form. So yes, not everybody had to wear corsets. You have options. And then I will show you one that I made. They don't have to be so rigid. The 1890s were very rigid and structured, but this is a replica one, and they didn't have to be white. This is made of silk, or cotton sateen, excuse me. The pattern said the original was made of sateen, and it's really soft, but the boning keeps it on. So especially on a hot summer day, you might want to wear a thinner corset. Options, many choices.
Were they ever called anything different?
Than
before they
corsets?
were called corsets
Good question.
in the earlier days?
Yes. Renaissance times and before, they were called a pair of bodies or bodices, bodies, half and half, because they'd fasten both front and back. It was two halves. And then we use the word stays for some of the early styles of corsets. They didn't always just call them that. I mean, they called them by multiple names, just like we'd say bra or brassiere or sports bra. They're different names for the same idea. All right, this is to show the range of shapes and sizes that could wear these This is one particular brand, Gossard, I think or Goddard corsets, that's what it was. But they all are going for that ideal figure, the smooth hips. This is about 1919. I'll give you a minute to look at all of them. Short, tall. It's a fun picture. Now you might notice too, these ladies are wearing lighter colored stockings, starting to get a little stylish. When your ankles show all the time, like the ladies at the races, you could wear white shoes and white stockings. And it's a very pretty look. Anyway, there they are, all wearing chemises. And you can see some of these women would benefit from a brassiere. But for this picture, they're just wearing a chemise and the corset, probably. The brassiere went over the corset, so it's just a lot of layers, a lot to wear. Let's not forget the men and the children. We'll look briefly. Women's clothes are so much more interesting because women's fashions changed every 4 or 5 years, at least in this time period. I suspect these are 2 little boys, like Christopher Robin haircuts, and shorts underneath that tunic. And they didn't used to think pink is for girls. That happened about the 1940s or 50s. Pink was considered to be related to red, which was a strong color. So these are probably little boys, brothers. What are they wearing underneath? Here's some little girls at a party. And you can see they're wearing socks, not stockings. It's probably summer. And here's a little guy all dressed up. He's got black stockings on, probably wintertime. And here is a paper doll that shows us what the little boys might have been wearing underneath. His drawers are bloused just like his knickerbockers would be, so that they'll stay put, stay down. And then he's got some sort of a shirt. Probably wasn't called a chemise, it was called an undershirt. But again, we don't want the outer clothes touching our bodies because it gets them dirty sooner. And laundry is an ordeal, so let's wear some underwear. And here, it's a whole page of ads of patterns you could order. And there is a child right here wearing what looks like a 2-piece outfit, and they probably button together. A white top and those blousey drawers. That would go under a tunic or under a dress. A boy or a girl could wear them. And they were made of woven cotton. They weren't doing knits yet, not very frequently. This is probably from about 1911. There were knits. They were worn for the long underwear. But for your everyday cotton, the ones you'd wash all the time, that was usually a woven. And then we look at the gentleman. In the 19th century and earlier, the shirt was considered part of the underwear. So we do look at shirts and kind of class them with underwear. But by the teens, even late 19th century, men are also wearing undershirts. Again, Laura Ingalls Wilder helped me realize that men could wear an undervest. She knitted one for Almanzo in the first years of their marriage. So on winter days, you'd wear something underneath that shirt. And this is a good look at 1922, pushing just a little past, but just to see what their drawers look like. And they're really starting to not be very different than what you'd see today. The drawers are longer, and there are buttons down the front because they didn't use elastic like we'd use today. But it's basically protecting your clothes from your body and protecting your body from chafing and discomfort, so very functional. Here we have a mix of knits and woven, so we're starting to get some comfort going. So really, if you think about it, we're not that different than our ancestors. They like to get together, they like to have fun, and of course, especially the ladies like to look nice. And now you know how they did it. I do have just a few more pictures. We've been talking about specialized things like men's corsets. Just a few more, if you can bear with me. What about sportswear? Special purpose underwear. Not everybody is wearing those long, rigid corsets. If you're bicycling, that's going to get in your way. And bicycles, the safety bicycle, was patented in the 1890s. And all of a sudden, women were on wheels. And it was just a huge revolution in women's freedom and autonomy. Well, you want to dress properly for the ride. So you'd wear a shorter corset. It might be shaped like this. And again, if you're young, you don't need a lot of support here. This is a ribbon corset. It's actually made of silk ribbons. And those are two different ones, actually. And there'd be this bow here to kind of fill in the gap. And you'd probably have your chemise under and maybe a corset cover over. But that's all you need. Now, your waistband will fit, but you've got big blousey bloomers or maybe a split skirt to ride your bicycle. So that's sportswear. Who would think? It's just so delicate looking. And then what about swimming? What did they wear for swimming? These women were posing for the picture. They're, again, average people having a great time. You can't really tell from looking. And some of them might be corseted and some of them might not. But the girl in the middle seems to have a pretty tiny waist. And if you're used to wearing one, you'd probably feel really sloppy without it. So you could get a specialized corset. This is made of wool. Their swimsuits were mostly made of wool as well. And that way, you're still supported, you've still got some structure there. If you're used to wearing it and you take it off, all of a sudden you don't have that back support. So there's a special corset for bathing. And then finally, here's a lady. You can help me decide, is she or isn't she? Is she wearing a corset? She was arrested for indecency while wearing this one-piece suit. Now that's a knitted fabric. It's knitted wool, like a merino wool, and she's wearing tights with it. She looks pretty covered up to us, but you can see the shape of her body. Yeah. But there she is, daring girl. So that's what I brought for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Answer questions.
Yeah,
Thank you all.
I'll be here. Yeah, thanks.